Imagine for a second if we could fantastical world filled with all kinds of strange and amazing creatures. Little speedboats with thousands of boards zip by our head at high speed, while giant oozing globs surround and engulf their prey. Meanwhile, you see a dancing green ball spinning and twirling across its landscape. All of this can be found in a single drop of pond water using a microscope. Hi, I'm Zach Martin from the Listed Livewires, and today I'm here to talk with you about life in a drop. I'll be discussing 3 types of organisms that you can find in drops of pond water, some common examples from each category, and how you can view these amazing creatures at home. The first group of organisms that I'll talk about today are the bacteria. I'll be discussing bacteria's characteristics, where bacteria can be found, their environmental role, and finally I'll talk about some common examples of bacteria that we can find in pond water. Bacteria are an extremely diverse group of organisms, and they all share some common characteristics. All bacteria are single-celled organisms, and what that means is that each separate cell is also a separate organism. All bacteria have a cell wall, which is a type of thick outer covering that surrounds a cell. Bacteria also lack specialized cellular compartments. What that basically means is that each process in a bacteria's metabolism, or the chemical processes that have to happen in order for it to survive, they aren't separated from one another inside the cell. They're all just sort of jumbled around inside the cellular fluid. And finally, bacteria have a wide variety of ways of obtaining nutrients. Some use the sun's energy for life, and others have to find food on their own. Since bacteria are extremely diverse, they also manage to settle in the most extreme environments on nearly every part of the Earth's surface. However, the most common places that you'll find bacteria are in animals' digestive tracts, on decaying organisms and waste, in aquatic environments such as a pond or a river. A lot of the time, you can find them in soil, and they also have important roles within the soil. And finally, they can be living symbiotically with other things. It's kind of a fun fact that on a given human body, there are about 10 times more bacterial cells than there are human cells. So on you, for example, there's more of bacteria than there is of you. And bacteria also have some very important environmental roles. Scientists believe that photosynthetic bacteria are responsible for the presence of oxygen in our atmosphere today. And if you don't know what photosynthesis is, it's where an organism such as a plant or a bacterium takes in the energy from the sun's light and carbon dioxide, and it uses that to create sugar, and at the same time it releases oxygen. So millions and millions of years ago, bacteria made the air that we breathe today breathable for us. And bacteria also help to decompose dead organisms and waste, and that's important for 2 main reasons. 1, because it helps cycle nutrients through an ecosystem, and 2, because it creates space for living organisms to occupy. And finally, they also have important roles in providing nutrients to the soil and pond life. There are certain types of bacteria that are called nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and they're super important because they take nitrogen in the atmosphere and they convert it into a form that plants can use in the ponds and in the soil, and that's really important in an agricultural state like Iowa, because plants need nitrogen to be able to grow and survive. And finally, I'll talk about some common examples of bacteria. First of all, there's the cyanobacteria, which is pictured here. And it's the type of photosynthetic bacteria that I described earlier. It's what's responsible for what's responsible for the presence of oxygen in our environment. And there's other types of photosynthetic bacteria, such as this purple photosynthetic bacteria. And they use just a slightly different process of photosynthesis than the one that I described. However, they still use the sun's energy for food. And finally, there's the sulfate reducers, like this one. If you've ever been around a pond that had a really nasty rotten egg smell, it's because of sulfate reducers feeding on the sediment and releasing gases that creates that odor. And the next group of organisms, and also my favorite, are the protists. Scientists classify protists into 3 broad categories: animal-like protists, also known as protozoans; plant-like, called algae; finally, there's the fungus-like protists, but they don't really have a specific name. And like bacteria, protists are also extremely diverse. However, they share these characteristics. They all have membrane-bound compartments inside of a cell, which are called organelles. So unlike bacteria, where each metabolic process wasn't separated from one another inside a cell, in a protist, each metabolic process is grouped with the same one, and they're separated by a membrane from the rest of the cell. And while some have cell walls, such as the algae, others, like protozoans, lack a cell wall. And finally, like bacteria, they have many diverse ways of obtaining nutrients. The protozoans, for example, have to eat other cells. However, the algae can use sunlight. Protists are usually found in aquatic environments, such as a pond or an ocean. However, there are a few species that are parasitic, such as the protozoan called Plasmodium, and it's what causes the disease malaria, which is prevalent in some parts of the world, like Africa. And like bacteria, protists also have important environmental roles. Like bacteria, some are important because they're decomposers. They help to cycle nutrients through an ecosystem to create space for living organisms. Algae also benefit the environment because they absorb excess carbon dioxide that might be wasted in factories or cars, and they release oxygen. And finally, I'll talk about some examples of protists. The paramecium is probably the most famous of which. If you look closely on a sample of paramecium, you can see it's coated with these little tiny hairs that are called cilia. And these are the oars that I described earlier. Paramecium is the speedboat. And it reads the cilia in unison, and that causes it to propel it forward, and it usually zips around through the water. There's the amoeba, shown here. And it feeds and it moves by extending these finger-like projections, which are called pseudopodia. That literally means false feet. And when it feeds, it will use 2 pseudopodia or so, and it will surround a cell that it wants to eat. And it will just keep extending those until the cell is completely engulfed by the amoeba, and then it can't get out from there, it's digested. And finally, there's the volvox, which is a type of algae. It's actually an algae colony. If you look closely on this sphere, you can see each one of these green dots is an individual cell. And these smaller spheres are the daughter colonies. And so it reproduces by making these daughter colonies. And when the parent colony dies, it will rupture and let these daughter colonies out. And also, all of the cells have what are called flagellum, which is a type of little tiny tail that will spin and propel the cell forward. And since all of these cells have flagellum and they're all moving at the same time, it creates a spinning motion. And this is actually a video that I made. And it's really brief, but I like it because it shows how a volvox will spin through the water if you watch it pass. Now, our last group today are the microscopic animals. It's kind of surprising that there are microscopic animals, since most are visible with the naked eye, such as like a person or a cat. However, there are a few species that you need a microscope to see, and this is just a sample picture of some pond water that I took at home. Microscopic animals have many similar characteristics to us. They're all multicellular, which means they're composed of more than one cell. So in contrast to the protists and bacteria, where their one separate cell is also a separate organism, in a microscopic animal, the cells usually have specialized tasks, and that contributes to the overall health of the organism. Also, microscopic animals ingest their food, kind of like you would eat a hamburger. They take it in through some kind of mouth, and from there it's digested outside of the cells in a digestive tract, and then the nutrients are absorbed. This is different than the bacteria and protists. They tend to absorb whatever they're trying to eat. And finally, all microscopic animals are capable of motion, so they can get around somehow. You can usually find microscopic animals in bodies of water, such as a lake, pond, or a stream. However, there are a few species of worm that live in the soil that are also microscopic. And this is a type of pond that you could probably find some kind of microscopic animal living in. And they also have some important environmental roles. They're important in decomposition and nutrient cycling, like I talked about before. They can also play roles as higher level predators. And that's important in an ecosystem because it helps create balance between different populations of species. For example, there's not too many algae, and there's not too many paramecium. There's balance between the populations. And finally, they can serve as a food source for even higher level animals on the food chain. For example, whales feed on krill, and microscopic animals make up a large part of the krill that whales feed on. And here are some common examples of microscopic animals you might see. First is the rotifer, which is this one pictured here. And like the paramecium, it also has cilia. You can see it towards the top of the animal. However, it has a different feeding mechanism. What it will do is it will anchor to some kind of rock or sturdy object in the water, and from there it will use its cilia to create a whirlpool that sucks in any cells passing by, which, if you ask me, is a pretty convenient way to feed. You just suck in your food. This is the water bear shown here. It's dubbed by scientists the world's toughest animal because they've been experimented on, and they've been exposed to extreme levels of radiation and heat, as well as being in the outer space and extreme cold. And they managed to survive by going into a hibernative state, kind of like a bear. That's where they get the bear nickname. And they can come out of that state once they've detected that conditions have changed for the better. This is the Daphnia shown here. It's what makes up a large part of the krill. Scientists use these Daphnias to experiment on and detect different water conditions and what effect they have on Daphnias. Finally, there's the Hydra shown here, and it's related to jellyfish. And like a jellyfish, it has tentacles. And similar to the rotifer, it will anchor onto something, and then it will sting its passing prey and eat it from there. And next, I'll talk about how you can look at these creatures at home. All you need is some kind of a pond or a stock tank, like this one. You can even probably use a bucket that's full of water that's been left out inside for a couple of days. This is a picture of a stock tank that I had at home. There used to be cattle out where I live. However, there are no longer cattle. And so over the years, it's filled with rain and dirt, and living things now occupy it. You'll need a microscope, like this one, or this one shown here. You can probably get these from a science catalog or hobby store. And you also want slides that come with the microscope. These are just clear rectangles made of glass that you can put your samples on. An eyedropper, like this one, so you can get an adequate size sample. And finally, a jar of some kind that you can hold your water with. And I'll also demonstrate how you can look at these when you're at home. You'll just take your eyedropper and put a few drops on the microscope like this, on the slide, sorry, like this. And then you'll put it on this part of the microscope, which is called the stage. And you'll slide the sample over the hole where light passes through. And then it's also important to make sure you turn on your microscope. And from there, you can swivel these things that look like a lazy Susan, and they're called objective lenses. They have different levels of magnification. This one, for example, is 4 times magnification, and the eyepiece is 10 times, so 4 times 10, 40 times magnification. And from there, you'll look into the microscope and adjust it into focus with these knobs. And if you find something interesting, you can then swivel to the next level of magnification and readjust it into focus. And I actually have some brief home video that I took with my camera at home. And it's really brief, but I like it because it shows what you'll see the first time you look into a sample of pond water. And if you look closely, you can see a couple of things that are moving around. And if I wanted to look at them in greater detail, I would be able to follow it by moving the slide around on the stage, and then I could swivel to a higher level of magnification. In summary today, I talked about 3 groups of microscopic organisms, their roles in their environment, where they can be found, some common examples you could find at home, or some common examples that you might find, and how you can view these amazing creatures at home. Here are the sources that I used for my presentation today. I used this biology textbook from a biology class last year. This educational site is what I used for my information on bacteria. Blender.org, that's the software I used to make my Molox video. I also used the Wikipedia articles for Daphnia, rotifer, water bear, and Hydra. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions?
Zach, you said you had where the cattle were to collect. Do you have a pond in your home also?
The question is, do I have a pond at my house also? No, I don't have a pond, but there is a creek that passes by, and I haven't looked in for anything in there yet, but I'll try to.
What got you specifically interested in this topic?
What was that, sorry?
What specifically interested you in this topic?
The question is, what specifically interested me in this topic? Mostly science classes in my school. In 6th grade, there was a unit on cells, and so we got to cover protists and microscopic animals in that one. And recently, I took a biology class online, and my favorite unit was taxonomy because I got to learn more about the groups within protists and animals and bacteria.